Hello good people, look where I'm at. So right now I'm at Eber's place. This will be the first time I shoot a case review in your area.
I'd also learn a lot more about cases, and perhaps I could do case reviews in the future.
Yes to that, for sure. But also, a second side of first is this review will be shot entirely on the Sony system now instead of my Panasonic stuff, alongside Eber's ADD. So this is a lot of room to maneuver. You know, I can do my thing over here on this table, not distract Eber while he's doing his own thing. So let's go get the case.
Let's do it.
Oh, how do you carry this up there? Eber, this is definitely a workout. Woo! Eber cleaning up the space for me over there.
Yeah.
Thanks, buddy. Eber, what you doing?
Well, I'm rolling up this mouse mat, but what's really odd is that these guys have a weird odor. So, yeah, if you guys experience the same, let us know in the comments down below.
It is actually pretty convenient how these cases arrive inside a bag. I can see it. Ooh, it's a piece of glass. It arrives detached. I wonder if like a mesh version is installed by default. Wow, it's like gunmetal. It's like beautiful. It's like charcoal almost. It's slightly darker than the original gunmetal. And yes, I was right. The mesh is pre-installed by default. So this is the first time Eber would peel the film.
It's exciting. Let's do it.
What are your thoughts?
It's amazing, dude. Check out that glass. I'm just worried though, man. This thing can be a huge fingerprint magnet. You see what I mean?
All right, so the H500M I feel like represents Cooler Master's current direction within the case industry. Make sure they cram as many features as possible. Make sure that they listen to as many community members as possible too, so that they can create almost the perfect case and avoid the the negative feedback they received from the H500P. And so I'm really excited to build in this thing and actually see what they've changed with this new model. So Eber shooting at your place introduces two challenges. One, shooting on the carpet, so all the tripod is not stable, everything is a little bit shaky. And two, he does not have Fred. Instead, we've got George. That's your plant.
This is my plant, but it's so fake. I know Fred's fake.
Fred's fake.
Yeah.
Fred is more beautiful.
Yeah, because that's just George is from IKEA, whereas Fred, is that from IKEA?
Fred is unique. You can never buy Fred.
Damn it.
All right, people. So the H500M, let's start with the price. It is $199, so it's $50 more versus the latest H500P Mesh case. So what does the $50 premium get you? So here with the H500M, we have 4 glass side panels, the front and the top, and both side panels. So you have to be a little bit extra careful with cable management, so that because that, of course, will be visible. And obviously on the left side, that is kind of the standard. But I really do like the side panel mount. They've kept the original one with a secure hold. You can unlock it with a coin or something. And this secondary swivel point, which makes reinstallation and removal of the side panel so much easier. I do like their new color scheme going on. It's no longer gunmetal gray. It's much darker. I would call it like charcoal gray. It looks fantastic with this new front panel design too, and how the ventilation wraps around it. But there are now more glossy elements that are annoying to deal with, especially with that front panel I/O that is just full gloss, which has 4 USB 3 ports and a Type-C Gen 2 port, the cable for which is really short and will not reach anything beyond your 24-pin connector. Obviously, the staple for the H500 series are the dual 200mm fans, where on this case, they are now digital RGB fans, which look fantastic, and they move the entire volume of air of this case per second. So cooling is definitely on point. Now the illumination for the fans looks beautiful. There are plenty of effects to cycle through. The solid colors, however, are only red, green, and blue. You cannot choose anything in the middle. So we have all these effects and only 3 solid colors, which is disappointing unless you connect a 5-volt addressable RGB header into your motherboard and have full software control then. But it is a closed illumination system, meaning you cannot add RGB strips to the controller and have all of them synced up together. If you are water cooling, a 360 rad can be installed at the front as long as you remove the front shroud piece that gives us 3 inches of space. But as you can see, the drive cage underneath sticks out an extra ½ an inch, so keep that in mind. And it can be removed also for more space, and you can also rearrange the 200mm fans up top if you wish. Now I really appreciate Cooler Master's approach to this dual paneling design, and I think the M in the model name has dual meeting modular mesh, so you can replace the mesh with the glass panel that looks a little bit more elegant, or keep the mesh that also has the Cooler Master logo and obviously gives you the most airflow. However, I don't particularly like the mounting approach. I don't understand why we have 8 screws and individual rubber washers per screw that falls out, and I think I've already lost a few. Why not just have a simple clip system that, you know, obviously would be a lot more convenient for installation. Of course, if you are replacing one, it's probably a little bit more permanent, so I get that you have to go through the hassle only once. However, the clip system would be more convenient. And in our CPU load test with Threadripper 1950X at stock settings, we are 2 degrees cooler with the mesh side panel at the front instead of glass, so the deeper front panel actually makes sense, allows for more cooling despite having a solid front panel. If you decide to go with the glass one, it looks a little bit more elegant than the mesh, but with the mesh, it is definitely cooler. The top panel is glass, and now with taller side ventilation, you can also do a 360 rad up here with flexible fan mounts, either closer to the side or the center, with a removable fan bracket for easier installation outside of the case. Now, I appreciate the removable top bracket, so you can install your fans and radiator outside of the case. However, there are no particular clips to actually mount the bracket to the actual frame, so if it's something super heavy and trying to bring it down, you'll have to be careful to make sure to align the mounting locations to where they're supposed to be, and there are no other aids like little clips where the bracket kind of actually sits in place, and that's a little bit unfortunate. However, the good thing is the fan bracket is symmetrical, so orientation of it does not matter when it comes back down. Now, the interior space is different from previous cases, so we now have a pump bracket installed by default. Not sure why, since this case is very much targeted for air cooling, but still nice to have. We also have a GPU support swivel clip that can be moved on these 3 rails, so you can have height adjustment, and also the power supply shroud is now angled in 3 pieces. So the power supply shroud, as with previous cases, is modular, so this front section comes out, and behind it we find a drive cage for 2 drive caddies. So it can be removed if needed, but look at this angular section for the other power supply shroud. It's a little bit unconventional. It doesn't really fit the design and the style of the interior, but my concern is at the back. And that is because the spacing between this panel and the actual frame is so little, I don't even know how you can pass, you know, a 24-pin cable in here and the rest of your cables all the way through here to the main chamber without potentially impacting this spacing here, because I don't know why this is angled. It doesn't need to be so closed off, and they could have definitely made this bracket a little bit more open so routing your cables will not be such a hassle. And so it looks like Cooler Master heard our feedback about more plating beside the power supply to cover up this area because it's fully exposed. And so it's actually quite cool to have no side panel on, which is what I did with my H500P Mesh build. But this new metal cover is actually not cable management friendly and makes the process more difficult. Also, the RGB controller is located here. It's well hidden, and that's where the reset switch is located. But the stock cables are not routed by default at all, and it's kind of a big mess that you'd want to cover up immediately, which is where this large front cover is important that is now on the swivel joint, so reinstalling it and compressing the cables underneath it is much easier. Alright, so I appreciate Cooler Master's approach towards the modularity of the frame, especially with the power supply shroud. You can remove the front, you can remove the drive cage, you can remove the other part of the shroud, but in order to access this little panel that has the Cooler Master little cutout here, you know, I don't particularly like it. I don't like how it fits in with the design. And so I wanted to remove it, potentially revealing my power supply. However, this is on another screw. So in order to access this little panel and this little screw here, you have to remove at least 9 screws to get to this point. And it's a little bit quite unfortunate how much work you have to do in order to do something as simple as removing a panel on a power supply shroud that you don't enjoy. All right, so this thing is out, and so far with the H500M, dealing with the whole power supply shroud, it's like a screw removing simulator. There's just way too many screws on here, but I do appreciate that at least almost all of them are consistent. So you know when you have to go repopulate things, all the paneling back, you don't have to like misplace certain screws because almost all of them are the same. Alright people, so let's build a system. We're deciding to go with an E-ATX motherboard, this gigantic, beautiful Zenith Extreme. because the case is pretty large and we are air cooling, which is most likely what this case is targeted for because of those giant 200mm fans. And because the case is pretty long, I wanted to go with an EATX motherboard so we at least occupy some of that space internally. So EATX inside the H500M, let's see how it stacks up. Now, because we are using an EATX motherboard, you can see over here that this entire section on the right side of the motherboard is completely blocked off because the motherboard covers our rubber grommets, so I cannot pass any of the cables. So we have to remove this entire section here in order to actually have space to route our cables. Now, one unfortunate turn of events when we're starting to do our cable management is there are no cable tie openings underneath the motherboard. So if you have to route anything to the left side of the motherboard, it has to cross this entire section at the bottom, because when the power supply shroud is on top, this whole area becomes inaccessible, and yeah, routing cables at the bottom of the motherboard becomes super inconvenient. Now here I am building a system and I'm thinking, wait a second, Cooler Master forgot to include SSD caddies inside a super expensive case, but no. We have these pegs that insert into the SSD, and then for each of the SSD mounts, we have these rubber grommets, and you simply insert the SSD like this. Now the case is beautiful and is obviously targeted for RGB showcase, which is why we added the TB RGB fans from Enermax that are beautifully glowing with those ring illumination that looks absolutely fantastic. I can control the lighting with the remote control, which is nice and simple, and I can also connect them to the motherboard to have that full control. And after I assembled the system, I realized that I don't particularly like to reveal the power supply, so in order to install back that little piece, I would have to remove the entire shroud, install it back with a screw, and then populate the whole thing back, which is annoying. And yeah, I just wish it was like a simple clip-on little piece that would go on the shroud for convenience. Now, in regards to cable management, Cooler Master have added this additional piece beside the power supply. It makes sense, and this is something that I've been asking for ever since the release of the original, because now we have a tempered glass side panel, and it obviously makes sense to make sure to cover as much of the cable mess as possible. And the only complaint here I have is that because of this new addition, the cutouts underneath the motherboard are no longer present, so they're missing, and that means that you have to route all your cables from this side that needs to go underneath, and that's kind of an issue. But to my surprise, despite the small area that allows all your cables to exit further from the power supply shroud, no issues there. They all pass through, and now this little door has a little hinge, so it can stay like this. It can swivel to open, and so you still have to compress it quite heavily in order to make sure that it is closed, but with some tweaking and spending a little bit more time on cable management, you can definitely make sure that this whole area looks pristine. And even though if you put the tempered glass side panel on here, it will actually look pretty beautiful. All right, Ibor, so now that you've witnessed the case review process, what do you think of the H500M?
To be honest, the whole process of building was a little bit difficult, especially with the power supply shroud. It was very difficult for us to actually manage the cables at the back into the motherboard. And the other thing is, of course, considering the EATX compatibility. That's something to keep in mind, because although this case supports EATX, routing cables could be a challenge, especially with the 24-pin connector. You might not be able to fit that panel or whatever that is properly. So those are some of the things that you need to keep in mind. But overall, I have mixed feelings about the H500M.
And so as Ibor said, with our EATX setup, the side bracket cannot be installed back into the case because it is simply not tall enough for the cables to bend properly. And so the H500M, once the system is assembled, gives me mixed feelings because I love the exterior design direction. I think this is the best looking H500 series case so far. Also, the modular front plate is a brilliant idea. I definitely want to see more like it. But I don't know if the interior changes were necessary, like the angled power supply shroud that to me does not match the interior design. I do like the departure from the SSD caddies to a toolless mount, but the two spots on top of the shroud are a complete pain to route because you need to remove the power supply completely. And for a $199 case, I feel like I should not have to fight it in order to simply pre-route my I/O cables. And for, you know, an EATX motherboard, you have to remove an integral part of the interior to have the system complete. I don't think that should happen. And throughout my experience with the H500P, the Mesh, and now this, I have not had a consistent experience, and I actually prefer the shroud design on the H500P Mesh. And of course, you can build a beautiful system inside the H500M. I feel like it's been designed to be this beautiful showcase piece with glass, a slightly darker color, the new ventilation pattern that looks really kind of aggressive yet elegant, and I would not have any issues having this beside my table, but I feel like the interior modularity is not exactly where it needs to be completely user-friendly, and I feel like I'm constantly trying to fight the case in order to remove some panel, in order to route some cables where they need to be, and this is like for the default configuration. And yes, we are using an EATX motherboard, but I feel like the case of this caliber and this size should accommodate an EATX system without any compromises. But let me know what you guys think about the $200 H500M in the comments below. Make sure to check out this other relevant content. We'll see you in the next video. Woohoo!